Ritik has to give us the good afternoon, friends, and welcome to the first edition of Authors Afternoons with an Author of the year 2022. As you are aware, as most of our listeners are aware, this edition of Afternoons with an Author started in August 2020 and has run regularly, except for the months of November and December, when we take a little break from the WOW main festival that is held in November every year. And we've covered 16 episodes so far. So I would urge you to take a look at our website for our previous episodes. This time, this edition is being brought to you with technical collaboration of Technopack, which is going to be partnering us in our outreach as well as our technical support. So thank you very much for joining us. We'd also like to acknowledge the fact that the National Digital Library of India is our partner and it's being relayed to all the NDLI clubs in the country. Thank you, Professor Chakravarti, for this. So for this edition, we are having Somi Roy's book, latest offering, because he's many offerings. So his latest offering is Manipuri Myths Retold, and that is why. In fact, it is and that is why Manipuri Myths Retold. Mr. Roy needs no introduction to listeners of WOW because he was a featured author last year. His book, the book of his mother's translation, Binodini Devi ji's historical novel, The Princess and the Political Agent, was shortlisted last year. An alumnus of St. Stephen's and JNU, Mr. Roy is professionally a cultural conservationist and a curator who writes on films, culture, and polo for publications both in India and the US. Roy is the founder of Emasi, the Maharaj Kumari Binodini Devi Foundation in Manipur. We're delighted, Somi, that you are with us. We look forward to a great conversation. Thank you. Our lead discussant is also a WOW author. In fact, we discussed a book, Tibbets with My Eyes Closed, in the 2019 edition, which was held in Dehradun. In fact, that was the last physical edition that we've had. After that, it's all been digital. Madhu has grown up in Dehradun, studied in the Cambrian Hall, and started a career as a journalist and has worked with Oxfam, Unifem, BBC World Service Trust. And the first book, The Keeper of Memories, was a historical fiction work on the Gurkhas. So what we're going to do now is that I'm going to be requesting Somi to introduce the book for the first 5 to 7 minutes. The book has got some lovely illustrations, and we would have loved to have the illustrator Safa Yumnam with us, but he's recovering from Omicron. But you will get to see some illustrations. Madhu will then take over and discuss various stories, the 12 stories which are here, and also give us a little background about Manipur. And all my friends who joined us on YouTube and Facebook. After Madhu has spoken, we will still have time, but 15 minutes to discuss your questions, to respond to your queries. So thank you very much for joining us. Over to you, Somi.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjeev, and thank you, Valley of Words. Tremendous pleasure to be back again with you. And what can I say? It's been wonderful working with you guys, including Madhu Gurung. I'm so delighted to have met you over the phone. We've had some amazing conversations over the last couple of days. And thank you, Ritik, for helping out. And of course, Tanya in the background, who's been instrumental in making everything happen. So today, Valley of Words has asked me to talk about a book that came out last year from Penguin Random House India, from the Puffins Young Adults Division. So it's a great privilege to be able to talk about this. It is a book for young adults that is based on Manipuri mythology. And it is retold for kids, as I like to say, kids from the age of 8 to 80. And it is drawn from several sources that I can talk more about in my interaction with Madhu and Sanjeev. The book is illustrated by Safa Yumnam, a young Manipuri artist. And the illustrations, I agree, Sanjeev, are quite delightful. This is probably one of the highlights of my collaboration with Penguin and with Sapa on this book, the illustrations that we have. The Manipur, as you know, in the northeast of India, has a fascinatingly rich culture, which even I am beginning to just in the process of discovering myself. And one of which is it has a manuscripts tradition, a very small one compared to, say, Arabic or Sanskrit. But it is a one that I came across maybe in 2005 or so when I started visiting India again. And I was fascinated by the manuscripts tradition. And so I came across a lot of manuscripts on mythology and religious practice and statecraft and history and genealogies and so on. So when I started working on this book, and Madhu and I, we can talk more about that, I was working on several projects, one of which was that I felt that the manuscripts were in danger, especially after we had an appalling incident in 2005, which really what kind of fired me, and that was the burning of the Manipur State Library. A lot of manuscripts and books were lost, and archaeological artifacts as well. And so I started working on the digitization of these manuscripts in collaboration with the University of Kentucky and with the British Library. And it's been a long, strange, circuitous route that I've been taking. But the happy result, the latest happy result is this book, because the stories that I'm telling here, which come from a digitization project as well as my Polo project, for instance, they all seem to kind of have their roots in the manuscripts tradition. And the manuscripts are not accessible to me. They're written in a different language of Manipuri, which is Old Manipuri. It's quite a bit like Chaucerian Middle English, or in its relationship to modern contemporary Manipuri. And it is also written in a script called Meitei Mayek, which is one of the few handful, less than 10, Tibeto-Burman indigenous scripts that exist. So of the Tibeto-Burman language family, to which Madhu's native tongue and mine belong to, there are about 400 languages, but about less than 10 scripts. So the manuscripts are written in this old script and in an old tradition, old language. So it's been quite a journey from trying to digitize it in collaboration with the United States and with the United Kingdom, and also working on Polo and working on with certain collaborators and projects on silk, things that I was beginning to discover in Manipur upon my return. Shall
Great,
I leave it
absolutely.
at that and you can take
No,
it
no,
up
in
with
fact, it's
Madhu?
a lovely
Yes, yes.
story about silkworms as well. But let me not get between you and Madhu. So over to you, Madhu, and we have a conversation for about half an hour, and then we'll open it up to whoever is there on the YouTube and Facebook. Over to you, Madhu.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here, and especially to talk about Somi's work. I've had the opportunity of having lived in Manipur in a beautiful place called Lemakong, which translated, and correct me, Somi, if I'm wrong, Lemakong means the river where the princesses come to bathe. And so I lived there when my husband, who was in the army, was posted there. But I think for those people who don't know much about Manipur, before I do come on to talking about Somi's book, I do want to talk a little bit about Manipur. If you come to Manipur and you actually entered the airspace and you're coming down to Imphal airport, the first thing that you actually see is a river body, and that's the Loktak Lake. And those round vegetation that is around rings, that is the Fundis. And that is how, for me, is Manipur. But Manipur has huge history and huge, wonderful things to talk about. I think one of the things that have left lasting impressions on me has been the Korangi airstrip, which was built by the Japanese to help their war effort. It was in Manipur, we have the Kangla Fort. Manipur also has was a place where the British Field Marshal Slim got his 14th Army together, and that 14th Army marched into Burma, and that is how the war with Japan ended and turned the tide of war for the British forces. More than that, I also remember that Manipur is the place where the Indian National Army was started by Subhash Chandra Bose in a place called Vishnupur, which is now called Bishanpur. And so, and of course, it is here that like hockey on horseback started, and polo. The world got polo from here. But I think when I do invite Somi to talk, I think I want to talk instinctively about what Somi's book felt like when I read it. I think for me, Somi, when I read your book, it was as if there was a person who was on a quest. I didn't know anything about your background, too much of it. I felt that it was as if you had come in and you were like an archaeologist, and you were digging, and you found so many gems, so many beautiful things. And then, in a way, you became its memory keeper. And as a memory keeper, that is what you felt, that okay, now when I reach this point, how am I going to give it to the world? How am I going to get it? How am I going to preserve it? And that is how you became a storyteller and a writer. I don't know, I may be all wrong and all over the place, but an archaeologist, a memory keeper, and a writer. I invite you, Somi, tell me whether I'm right or wrong, but let's just take it from here.
Thank you, Madhu. That was a very nice introduction to Manipur. And having had your first-hand experiences here, you have a special connection to me and to my people and to my state.
Yeah.
So it's really delightful to be with you. Archaeologist. I've never been called that. I've been called a lot of things, and which is one of the things I actually enjoy, because I do these projects somewhat organically. They kind of develop along the way. I specialize in cross-cultural connections in my museum exhibits in the US and New York. I work with Asian cultures, and I've worked with more than a dozen of them. And so working with my own culture, with Manipuri culture, is, of course, a special thing. And as we do in curating, we are part historians, we are part, we look at the sociology, we look at the art forms, we look at aesthetics forms and systems and so on. And yes, it's a bit like an archaeology, especially in Manipur, because Manipur has been traditionally, and until very, very, very recently, fairly isolated and insular. And it is tucked away in a corner, even though it used to be the center of its own civilization for all of its history. For the last 75 years, for the last 100 years or so, after the British took over Manipur in 1891, we've become part of something larger. But until then, we've actually been fairly insular and fairly discrete in itself, with its own worldview. And it's the worldview that I'm discovering. Yes, it's archaeology. It's like discovering a palimpsest of experiences and expressions. Layers after layers and layers. And how do these layers connect to each other? Some layers are personal, because I'm from here. Some layers are familial, because my family is from here. Some are cultural. Some are simply baffling. I don't know where some of these connections are going to be. It's not a road that has been finished traveling upon. We have to keep looking at these things. But I was coming to look at making connections from first my introduction to manuscripts by this amazing older gentleman who's now unfortunately passed away, Pandit Khel Chandra, to whom I dedicate this book. And he's an old family friend, and his family is still friends with me. We're very, very close. And I learned about the manuscript from him. He's the first one who told me about the polo god, what we call the polo god now, some of the Nayanga, for instance. So it's been through conversations and interactions that I've been able to kind of dig deeper and deeper, maybe uncovering layers and layers and scattering them around me and then making connections. Other people have sometimes said that what I do, my projects, like I've worked in Appalachia and I work with China and I work with Israel and so on, that it's more like what they call remapping. We're connecting dots. Madhu, remember when we were kids, maybe they still have them, you know, those dot
Yeah, yeah.
puzzles?
And
You
an
connect
image comes out.
one,
Yeah,
two, three, four, and then it
yeah,
becomes a rabbit, right?
yeah.
So a friend of mine was telling me, a colleague of mine was telling me that what I was doing was making a new connecting 1 to 5 and 5 to 9 and 9 to 11 and 11 to 2, and creating an elephant instead of a um,
Mm,
rabbit. And where I was coming from is that since I was working with culture, and this is why I'm a cultural conservationist, my projects are all about cultural conservation. I'm very interested in small cultures. I'm very interested in regional cultures. And especially in this day of globalization, what's going to happen to the languages of these places? What's going to happen to the memory keepers, as you say, of these places? What's going to happen to the memories of these places? Where are the narratives? Have they been, I mean, for one thing, they've already been somewhat submerged. So we're building these new narratives, like in this book. But when will these narratives disappear? Many civilizations have come and gone. And now,
yeah.
in the age of internet technology and digital technology and communication, what do we have? We have smartphones, we have connections, we have romanization, we have people texting to each other. People have greater social mobility and, geographical mobility than ever before. So a world homogeneity is beginning to come. But I'll tell you this one thing, and that is, of all the places that I've been to, that I've visited, Manipur is the one culture that seems to have kept it intact. Oh, we complain here on, oh, this is lost and this is being degraded and that's in decline. But compared to all the cultures of the world that I've had the good fortune of interacting with and working with, I find that a lot of the forms are still pristine. They're living. It has a high culture. It's a civilization, and I use this word advisedly. It's a civilization, and it's a culture that is a civilization, and it's a very small one also, which is kind of the interesting thing about it. I
Yeah.
like to think of it as like a dollhouse, or a miniature dollhouse that has all the little parts. It has a door, it has windows. If you look inside the window, you see a little bed. In the bed you have a little doll. So it has all the different parts of a civilization. Yet it is very small. So how did this happen? One of these parts is mythology. And this is what I discovered, that with nursery rhymes, with folk retellings around the family hearth, with books, and people here, they publish maybe about 6 or 7 books a month here in Manipur. There is no publication house really, so they're all self-published. I'm in the process of publishing. I have my own Imasi publications for the Imasi Foundation. I'm in the process of putting out a book this coming next Sunday. So we put out these books, and so it is a language with a high resource. It's called high resource language. It's complex, And one of the complexities is the different languages and the different traditions. And this manuscripts are coming from the pre-Hindu tradition of Manipur, because Manipuris, like myself, Meiteis, as we are called, our endonym is Meitei, we are Vaishnav Hindus. And we turned to Vaishnavism about 300 years ago. But before that, there was another religion, an older religion that was animistic and based on ancestor worship. A lot of the characters in these books are ancestors that figure in historical terms, ancestors that are deified and have become gods, for instance. So these are some of these layers that I'm uncovering, but I'm also not discarding them. I'm kind of scattering them around and trying to make a connection, and the connection with Penguin, the connection with Sapa, the connection with my collaborators and sources and people who have helped me on the book, like Mangang Sana, the oral balladeer for the oral sources, Him Chandra, the archivist for the actual manuscripts. He has an amazing collection of illustrated manuscripts we can talk about later. And Thoyangba, who also published a little tiny, charming collection of books. I think it was retailing for 20 rupees on the market when he published it, with little funky little drawings. And so we have published sources, we have manuscripts, we have oral traditions, and we also have our own memories of how we heard these stories before. So building this narrative in collaboration with an international publishing house, with storytellers and singers and archivists and scholars and writers, has been tremendous. I mean, just working with the 3 or 4 editors at Penguin has made me rethink these stories over and over again. The questions they ask: what is this art form? It didn't have a name, so I named it Subika, for instance. So we kind of rise to the occasion of storytelling and narrative, but the end product, the target audience, is the English language reader in India. And for them, I needed to write a story that has a once upon a time to a happily ever after structure. So that fairy tale kind of structure brought me back to my own childhood, the fairy tales that I like to read, the children's stories that I came across that found me huddled in corners reading book after book after book of what? Of Brer Rabbit, of Rudyard Kipling, of fairy tales from around the world, etc. And so it's been it's partly a personal, social, personal exploration as well. The archaeology is also a personal archaeology. It's also finding my place, my meaning in Manipur after having been away for very long. What is this culture that brought me up? And where do I fit in? What is happening over here? What can I do? What do I think needs to be done? And above all, what is interesting to me and what is fun?
Okay, Somi, I find that very interesting that you talk about mythology, you talk about songs, themes, and everything. Let's talk about, somewhere down the line, you've been away for a very, very long time, I think almost 35 years, and you come back. So you come back with a lot of sensibilities of the West. You come here, you're digging up your own roots. You're finding the quest is just started. It's going to be, you'll find even more connections. But I think what would be interesting for people to know is that, those 35 years out and now, and then there are a lot of cross connections. Cross connections and stories that you have read as a child, as an English reader, to the mythologies and the manuscripts that you've now discovered. So what are the cross connections that you have come up, legends, maybe stories, somewhere down the line, everything connects. Everything is the same and yet so very diverse and said very, very differently. So would you like to talk about that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, once perspective changes, perspective on yourself, on the world around you, working, collaborating opens one's eyes. You learn from experience and from what you do. And it's only from what you do that sometimes you begin to see what you're doing. Sometimes you can just keep thinking, but as you know, Madhu, as a writer, once you start writing, then suddenly things come up. It becomes alive. It becomes a thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I worked in cross-cultural exhibitions for the Asia Society. That's where I started my career. We have an Asia Society branch in Bombay, by the way. Did you know
Oh,
that?
okay.
Asia Society India?
No,
Um,
no.
yeah, so then I work, basically a film curator for exhibitions, and I've done a few film festivals also. But in all these things, it's always looking at another culture, it's looking at another artist, at another mode of expression. And I grew up in a writer's home. The picture you see behind me, and I'm sitting in my office alcove here, is my mother who wrote this is a writer called Binodini. So I grew up with writing around me, and since she had a very famous salon called Ruprag that gathered artists, maybe 10 or 12 artists every single evening after work. So I
Wow.
grew up surrounded by music and film and theater and writing and poems and dancers and actors and so on. So that was a very special training. I think that was basically my training as a curator, as being looking at the creative process. So those connections are important, but the exposure that I had to aspects of global culture and trying to reinterpret that for American audience, right? So I was basically importing Asian culture into America for American audiences. So now, when I work with Manipur, what do I do? When I go to Shanghai to look at films, I went as an American, I went as a New Yorker, right? Now here, I'm not. I'm of the soil. I belong here.
Yeah.
A lot of people kind of probably find me a little weird around here, but um, I cannot be the other. I cannot be looking at Manipuri culture like you would. Or if Sanjeev, when it comes to Manipur, he will look at Manipuri culture in a particular way, which is also very, very valuable. Your introduction of Manipur extremely interesting to me. What struck you about this place, for instance? But
Yeah.
I cannot be the other to myself. I cannot
Yes.
exoticize myself.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so I have this constant. It's almost like a constant electricity going back and forth of ideas. They flow in both directions. Partly it's myself, partly it's the other. The trained eye becomes the other, but the emotional eye becomes the local. And
Yeah.
the connection of the mythology is extremely wonderful tool for this, because mythology is an aspect of religion. So it speaks to the philosophy of a people. And mythology is also composed of two different parts. One part is universalistic, archetypal, that you can find in every mythology, which makes every mythology, whether it's Greek or Sumerian or Marvel comics, for instance, with the currently mythology I think is happening, or Harry Potter, another mythology that's contemporary. These things have a lot of universal archetypes. The wizard, Merlin, Professor Dumbledore. I mean, all the Ojas, all the pundits. I mean, you find these great sages in every mythology. They are higher than the king. They have magical powers. And so we have these archetypes. And then we have some very, very specific characteristics of a mythology. So Manipuri mythology is just one of India's mythologies. There's no such thing as an Indian mythology, because there's no such thing as an Indian religion. There's several religions. So you have Hindu mythology, which is wonderful, which also exists here, by the way, because of the coming of Hinduism here. So you have Hindu mythology, you have Buddhist mythology, and Islamic mythology, and then in this little corner we have little Manipuri mythology, teeny little thing,
Yeah.
So in a way, as a cultural conservationist, one sees the need to conserve certain things. And in order to conserve certain things, you have to figure out what to be conserved. in order to figure out what do we conserve, we have to say what is beautiful, what is valuable, and to make the decisions about this is worth conserving and that is dross and probably left to itself is a decision that is an ongoing decision that's based on aesthetics and social values and ethics and philosophy and so on, right? So each culture has those valuations to say this is important, this is beautiful, this is worth keeping, and this is, oh, okay, we can, it doesn't matter if it gets lost, all right? So so I was very pleased, for instance, that when I translated my mother's historical novel, The Princess and the Political Agent, it became a Penguin Modern Classic. To be categorized as a Penguin Modern Classic from the northeast of India, from Manipur, is very special. Now we are framing it. My projects are also about reframing and repurposing. And I've repurposed these myths using both the universal and the specific archetypes to frame this mythology for a different generation in Manipur. And they love it. The younger people love the stories, by the way. Oh, my grandmother told me the story, but she never told me the ending. Now I know the ending, or, oh no, my grandfather's version is slightly different, because all these versions are different. And so the reframing of it, the remapping of it, and the archaeological dig, and to create a memory keeping. We've revived this book, a memory keeping, by framing it for new readers, for new minds, for new ears.
Yeah.
And it's not limited to Manipur now, because we're now writing it in English for another readership altogether. So it's been quite interesting. I've been having fun, as you probably can tell.
Yeah, I think it has very global appeal. That's one of the best things about the book. But when I talked about the cross connections, I also felt that there were some stories where you could immediately make connections with, oh, I've heard a similar kind of a story somewhere, like the cuckoo, the pied cuckoo, or remember the two brothers, the sibling rivalry and all that? Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Very interesting you brought that up, Madhu. Thank you. I was in the process of writing The Pied Cuckoo because I knew about the pied cuckoo from a nursery rhyme that goes nongobi sari leino ture leina se. You ask anyone below the age of 35 over here, no one's heard this. It's gone out. So we've kind of revived that that nursery rhyme as well. But then my mother also was a social activist, and she did a project called Nongobi, the Pied Cuckoo, because the story is about cleaning rivers. And there was so much trash in the river next to our house that she started a Nongobi arts project of engagement, arts engagement. I'd also come across, because, my coming back and changing my base to Manipur is really to preserve the work of Binodini, the writer. So I'm in the process of looking at her unpublished work. I'm working on my third volume of collected unpublished work by Binodini. Third one is supposed to come out in a week's time. I'm quite palpitating, quite excited.
That's
also
exciting.
But this is the third volume. I have maybe three more to go. And so she had written an essay called Nongobi, the Pied Cuckoo, which I discovered much later. Right? But the essential story of the Nongobi, the Pied Cuckoo, has a certain parallel to Kalidas's Meghdut, in the sense that they're both based on the cuckoo. So the Pied Cuckoo, elders and ancients also observed that the pied cuckoo comes with the rains. And the monsoon is this amazing thing that happens every year in South Asia. And the cuckoo comes with the clouds, with the rain clouds. So if you see a pied cuckoo, people have always observed and remarked that, oh, the rains are going to come. So in Kalidas's Meghdut, he becomes a messenger that flies with the rain clouds, and he describes what he sees below in India, with cities and palaces and rivers and mountains, the wonders of India. That is the spine of this great poem, the
Yeah.
Sanskrit music. But and in the Manipuri version of the Pied Cuckoo, it becomes a cautionary tale of why you should work together, and must be part of a community. So the bird is asked to take part in community work in cleaning the rivers, and she
Yeah.
refuses. So
Yeah.
what is the moral of the story? Because every fable has a moral, right? The two brothers story is a very common universal archetype, much more
Mm.
universal than the Pied Cuckoo, which is basically a South Asian thing. You
Yeah.
find the sibling rivalry, the two brothers, the younger brother getting the birthright, and the older brother getting very upset
Yeah.
about this, angry. You find it in the Bible, the legend of
Yeah.
mythology of Isaac and Esau. You find it in Ganesh and Kartik in
Yes.
India, in Hindu mythology, and then you find it in the story of Pakhamba and Sanamahi in Manipur.
Yeah.
So um, that is one of those universal archetypes that I was telling you about. And there are certain resonances that makes you
Yeah.
connect, that makes your mind connect from one part, making an unfamiliar connection to another part, things that you're not thought before, but
Yeah.
also seems remarkably familiar. That you have heard this
Yeah.
before. This is real to
Yes.
me. So
Yeah.
mythology has that character, and that is why when you see Star Wars, the hero, the journey of the hero strikes you immediately.
Mm.
That's why that film is so popular, because it
Yeah.
follows the arc of the pilgrim in Pilgrim's Progress, or any hero of Achilles, or Ulysses going to Troy. These are all the journey of the hero combating personal demons and social problems and armies and death and so on, and overcoming it, and thereby becoming the hero. So
Yeah.
um, these are archetypes of the hero and the siblings and so on, and specifically to South Asia, because the ornithological
Mythology.
form of the pied cuckoo is specific to South Asia, because the bird comes from Africa, flies across the Arabian Sea, which is not in the manuscripts. I googled it, so
Oh, okay.
I had to find out, like, where is this white cuckoo? I looked up a picture of it. I listened to sounds of it.
Yeah.
Then I find out the migratory route that it takes, flying from Africa across the Arabian Sea, across India, and then goes via Manipur, and then
Mhm.
it's very much an actis policy kind of bird, right? And then and then it flies to southern China. So let's call it
Yeah.
the actis policy bird.
Practice policy
I
bird.
think Sanjeev
Oh,
will
okay.
get very much. So, are we frozen? No. I can't hear you, Madhu. Are we on? Are we on? Da, 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 da. Are we on? I could keep talking, but have I lost you guys?
Somi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay. So while while we wait for Madhu to join us, I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating, and I thought, why don't we talk about polo, the story of polo? Because
Ah,
this is what Indian sport, and I think we must do. We must try to get it into the Asian Games and then the Olympics. How is Manipuri polo different from the mainstream polo? Can you tell us something about this? And
sure.
you've done a lot to promote polo in Manipur, so you could
Yeah,
probably
it's
also tell me about the story.
yeah.
So
Thank you,
those are
Sanjeev.
fascinating stories.
Thank you for putting me on my hobby horse. I can talk endlessly on this subject. But polo also is a cultural conservation project that turned into polo, to international polo. When I came back to Manipur, I found that our Manipuri ponies were roaming the streets, eating trash, which was not there when I left in the early 80s. And so, where did these homeless street ponies come from? So, my mother was very upset. She was a celebrated horsewoman, and my family are all polo players. And so so I kind of got interested in this, but otherwise I have zero interest in polo. I have zero interest in animal welfare. I'm really not really much into any of that. But I discovered then through Pandit Khel Chandra that polo has a sacred history to it for Manipur, and that there was a shrine to a god called Marjing, one of the directional guardians of the Valley of Manipur, and that god figures in all the Polo mythology. So I started doing this, and then because I was spinning my wheels and not really getting anywhere, that I kind of roped in the polo community here. And since Manipur is very small and very poor and not very powerful in all these things, and suffering from all these stasis of old underdeveloped economies and so on. Things were not moving very much, so I kind of roped in. I talked to my friends at the United States Polo Association, and we brought in American Polo here. The USPA, we brought the USP to India for the first time. I take Manipuri International Polo. We introduced several things that we provide value-added services, as I call it, and then we take American Polo and Manipuri Polo to. We've taken them so far to Jaipur, another capital of polo, the crown jewel of Indian polo, really, and to Hyderabad and to Bombay. So it's a national program that is based in Manipur. And I like that, to say that even little Manipur can contribute to the larger Indian culture, and we contribute to our riches. It may not be money, but it could be sporting talent, and so on. And so now I have, with my partners Ed Armstrong and Rupa Barua and Paul Nabaroon and so on, we have an annual International Women's Polo here. And then I began to discover that actually polo was from here, and they were calling this the birthplace of polo. And I said, actually, no, it's the birthplace of modern polo, because polo has many different origins: Azerbaijan and China and Tibet and India. And people are still writing the history of polo. But modern polo, as we know it, comes from 19th century Manipur, taken from here by soldiers of the East India Company. It predates Victoria's reign here, and so the older polo, which is described in our manuscripts also, the first game is described as a game that was played at the crowning of the younger brother, Madhu, Pakangba, that we were talking about. So in Pakangba, the deified ancestor becomes the king and establishes the Manipuri dynasty, which rules even today. A polo game was played. And that is written about in the manuscripts. And even Lord Marjing, whom we've called the god of polo now, because I felt it was important to recognize his role in polo, since we obviously had lost the importance of the sacredness of the animal by allowing it to be homeless and eating trash on the streets. So creating the sacredness, recreating it, was my cultural conservation part of it, which led to polo. And polo by itself in Manipur was a game that is still similar to the modern game. Like any horse that plays polo is called a polo pony, whereas a pony is supposed to be more than 13 hands high. That's because of the Manipuri pony. There are still the rule that says you can only hold a stick in your right hand as a Manipuri rule, for instance. So many of the rules of Sabul Kangjai, the original Manipuri game, exist in modern polo today. But modern polo has been taken from here by Britain to the rest of India, and then to England, and from England to it hopped over the Great Pond to New York, and to the US, and went to Argentina, for instance. So the game has been developed more over there. And what I'm doing now is kind of importing back something that originated from here, but importing it back as an international sport over here. And I'm very proud to say that we have 3/4 of the women polo players in the country, and we have about 1/3 of the male polo players in the country. So this is a highly polo intensive place. And the remarkable thing about polo here is that unlike any other place in the world, it is not the game only of kings and princes and rich people. It is a very egalitarian sport, and we have villages that play polo. And I myself am working on a rural polo project at this point.
Great.
Okay.
So we also need to design a Manipur polo cap, unlike the USPA. So, I think next time we see you on the WOW, we should have the Manipur polo cap.
Yes.
I will.
Sorry.
I promise you I'll do that.
Yeah, okay, great. Madhu, we lost you in the middle, so
Yeah,
it's
I'm
time
so
for the
sorry.
last question.
Something happened,
Yeah,
some problem. Can I jump in now?
yeah, please.
Yeah.
Last question, and then we'll
Uh,
open up to the audience.
yes. Somi,
Yep.
uh, yeah, listen, I enjoyed what you talked about the polo. May I just talk about the beautiful illustrations of the book, because I think not only does it make the book so charming, it makes each and every story immensely endearing. So, if it's possible, can we talk about the Subika, the new art form that you and your artist friend have come up with? Let's talk about a little bit about that, because also I think alongside the very beautiful illustrations, there's also calligraphy, which is in a text which is so beautiful. So if you would like to, if it's possible for it to come on the screen, if not, I would like you to speak about it a little bit before we open it up.
So hey, Ritik, why don't you put the pictures up on the screen and we'll talk? I'm sure people are fed up of looking at our faces anyway by now. So. Okay, so I'm really sorry that Sapa could not join us. He's not feeling well. But the illustrations are a very important part of this book. And I had no idea where I was going with the illustrations. I had an idea that I wanted to use the illustrations that are found in the old manuscripts. Now, the illustrated manuscripts of Manipur are a very small minority of the manuscripts that exist. Only the manuscripts of magic and religion and ritual and prognostication and fortune telling are illustrated. The bulk of the manuscripts of genealogies and state policy and irrigation and stories about the white cuckoo and all that, they're not illustrated. All the histories, the mythologies, the romance, the novels, the others. So this group of manuscripts is called Subika. Actually, there are two kinds, as I learned along the way, Subika and Kutlo. So there are these groups of manuscripts that are illustrated. I was entranced by these drawings, very funky little, crazy little drawings. So when I'd finished writing the book, I mean, I've been thinking about how to illustrate this. Now, the thing is that my engagement with these stories actually starts from art, actually, because I was planning an exhibition. Once I came across these manuscripts that enchanted me in Pabung Khel Chandra's collection, I was planning to do an art exhibition in Brooklyn and in Berlin with my friend Liv Mette Larsen, who's a Norwegian living in New York. And we were going to show manuscripts alongside some modern paintings that Liv was going to be making. She's an abstract painter, just to use a loose word. This was part of my expression of Digitize Manipur, which was my project to digitize the manuscripts of Manipur, which, by the way, Madhu Sanjeev, was an utter failure. It's still it was one of the biggest failures of all my projects. I still haven't been able to do it properly. But along the way, I was kind of strategizing differently in different directions, the art exhibition idea came up, and we were planning it. We found we had a Berlin art gallery in Berlin and one in Brooklyn, in Bushwick. So we were planning this, and then I came across. I was doing a digital archiving workshop in New Delhi with the
Right.
University of North Texas, and then we have aha. Shall we see the big one, Ritik? The one
Oh, the
that
title
is.
is there.
We can start anywhere; it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And then so the when I met Penguin there, and here it is. So this
Yeah.
is and
So I think carry on, Somi. I think this illustration has come, but you can describe this.
Sumi?
I think we'll carry on with the conversation. It's a bit we've not been able to crack this code, so let's carry on with our conversation.
I think we've lost Sumi. Sumi?
Anyway, till Somi comes, let me add some things about Manipuri history and about something which a lot of our readers may or may not know. But you know that place called Mount Harriet in Andaman and Nicobar Islands that's now been named Mount Manipur in honor
Oh, yeah?
of the Manipuri revolutionaries. I mean, of course, they were called mutineers at that time, but revolutionaries who were lodged there
Okay.
in 1892. And earlier, some of the first people who were sent to Andaman and Nicobar Islands were those who had taken part in the Anglo-Manipur War. And therefore,
Yeah.
finally, it is also a resurrection of history because finally we've been able to understand the real heroes of India's independence. So I think
Yeah.
Manipur was the third largest contingent of people, of prisoners who were sent to Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The first, of course, were Bengalis, second Punjabis, and third were Manipuris. Now look at it as a very small state in one corner of the country is a major contributor to the freedom movement of the country at that point of time. So I think
Yeah.
Manipur, as Somi has brought out, it's a unique, it's an absolutely unique place because it's part of the Vaishnavite tradition. It's part of the Vishnupuri tradition, and it's also retains the past before it adopted Vaishnavism. So I think it's a fantastic story about how India has evolved. It's a fantastic story about how Manipur has integrated itself. It's also a story of how India has learned so much from Manipur. It's also a
Oh,
story
yeah.
of great valor. It's a story of great resistance. And therefore, I think there's a lot that we learn from this book.
And,
Madhu, my favorite stories have been two of my favorite stories. One has been about the silkworm tradition, and
oh,
the
yeah.
second,
I
of
like that too.
Polo.
Yeah.
So, which have been, other than these two, which has been your favorite story in this book?
I quite like the pied cuckoo because it epitomized the working for the community. I think the whole thing of putting it all together, picking up mythology and try and make it as interesting to the young reader is something has been that Sumi has really excelled in. He's been able to do that, to transcend that thing and also use all the things, the sensibilities of the West that he's learned, and that comes across in those stories. They're very, very nicely put. Like dear confused one, when he's addressing the kids, dear not so good one, things like that. So it comes up in different paragraphs. So I thought that was really, really beautiful. And I think when we talk about art, especially when I mean, Somi would have been better person to speak about it. It just it's not only very, very unique, but it's so much stemmed in the earth of Manipur. It's got very earthy colors. It's so much steeped in their religion as well as mythology. And one of the things that I saw in one of the things that he had sent was a manuscript. which was
Yes,
there.
yes, absolutely.
And that manuscript was something, when you looked at it very closely, you found how powerful that thing was, and that they've been able to translate and make it their own. That's how Subika came about. I think that is really interesting.
Yes,
Would it be?
I think there's a very valid point, and because Somi is not here, so let me ask you a question. You see, you
Yeah,
worked with Nepali, you worked with Tibetans. Now you've had this book of tales from Manipur. You've been in
yeah.
Myanmar, and as somebody who's been connected with the army, uh, what is the common thing that you find amongst all these stories? Especially if you were to look at stories from Nepal, stories from Tibet, stories from Myanmar, and stories from Manipur. So, what do you see? I mean, how do you see this tapestry panning out?
I think the entire landscape, if you were to look at it, I think something or the other is similar. It's like the same tapestry is weaving itself. Like there is always magic, and that is like keeps you hanging, like almost like even in the thing where the magician's parrot has his soul. So to kill the magician or the wizard, you actually have to kill the parrot. So things like that, and some things like the snake, the magic, the wizardry, the courage, all that comes across. I think Somi finally, Somi, we are waiting for you.
I'm so sorry. We've had a power outage all afternoon, and
Okay.
so my laptop ran out of juice, and so did my other phone. So I'm logging in. Oh, I don't know. Whatever. I'm back.
Great. Great. So
Okay.
Oh,
while you
sorry.
were away, we carried on a little conversation. Now, Swami, there's a question to you. The question
Yeah.
is that is there a second edition? Are you going to be telling more short stories like this? And is there a possibility of an audio book? So this is some of the audience
Oh,
questions. So maybe you'd like to address
oh,
that.
audiobook. What an idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to I'm going to credit you with that, Sanjeev, if that ever happens. I've never even thought
It's
about
come
it.
from it's come from you. It's come from
Yeah,
you.
yeah, that's a great idea. I am thinking of writing a collection of folk stories because when I first started working on this book with Penguin, we went back and forth about these stories. They kept calling it folk tales, and I kept saying no, it's mythology. So that distinction seems to be important to me as a cultural conservationist from that angle. And the folk tales that I think I'll be working on. I mean, this year's my mother's centenary, so I'm kind of a little busy with many things. But the folk tales are more secular. They don't have a religious aspect. They're fun in its own in their own different way, but the mythology, of course, is an aspect of religion, of the previous religion, the pre-Hindu religion. So the folk tales is something that I'll probably be working on. I'm trying to get a co-writer to do some work for me, and so we can work on it together. And the co-writer is a young mother, besides being an IT professional, because one of the problems that I have and had from the very beginning is that I don't have any children. And I've never had the experience of bringing up kids or telling them stories. I had to go to my own experience as a child, but as an adult, I've never had to tell a story, bedtime stories to kids, for instance. So I really feel that's a lack, a big disadvantage in my previous book. So if I do this, I'm hoping to work with a young mother who can bring her experiences as a parent, as folktales as part of parenting.
Great, wonderful. So we've had a wonderful session. Although we were in and out, but we were able to connect everyone. And I would like to thank you, Somi. Thank you very much for having been with us and for having shared your thoughts, for having told us the difference between folk tales and mythology, for having taken us to the history of polo. Thank you very much, Madhuji, for joining us. Your experience and the way you asked those questions made it very, very insightful, made it very, very interesting. And we do look forward to more such conversations. Before I close, let me thank all of us who joined us on the YouTube and the Facebook. Thank you very much, Tanya. Thank you, Ashutosh Cha, who's coordinated with the NDLI, with Parmesh, Ritik, Amir, and Suhail for ensuring that this conversation has been there in spite of some minor glitches. And friends, before we close, let me tell you that next month we'll be featuring Pramod Kapoor's latest book on the Naval Ratings Mutiny of 1946. We'll keep you posted about that. So happy listening. More power to the pen. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Somi.
Thank you.
And thank you, Team
Thank you.
Bao, for connecting with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you.
Somi. Thank you, Sanjeev.
Yeah. And to all the team, thank you very much.